So I'm from the US, and I grew up there. I actually never left the US until the semester before my last year at university. And I had the opportunity to come here to Hong Kong on an internship with my brother-in-law's nonprofit, which is called Soap Cycling. And he brought me here, and I basically, I was interested in a career in business and entrepreneurship, and I never really thought about the social stuff that much. And so I did this internship, and I saw the problems that migrant domestic workers face in Hong Kong. So helpers, Filipino and Indonesian workers. And you hear about the cases of abuse and mistreatment. And there's a common thing, when you start to talk to people about it, the common thought was people would say, well, why don't they leave, right? If it's so bad in Hong Kong, they can go home. And the reality is that they can't go home because they're debt bonded to their jobs. These workers, for the opportunity to work abroad, they're typically taking a loan and paying 6 months of their wages to an employment agency for the opportunity to come here and work 6 days a week in our houses. And so what happens is they fall into this cycle of debt bondage where they're always behind and they're always, in with these money lenders. And what happens is with that system, they can never leave even if it is bad. So if they're abused or mistreated, they're still afraid to quit their job, even if they don't have that initial debt anymore. And so it made me mad, right? Because to me, I grew up in the US. Like I said, I never left there. And so they have this saying of like, people should get themselves up by their bootstraps, right? If you work really hard, your dreams will come true. And the reality is that there's a lot of people in this world who that's just totally untrue for. And this was one of those scenarios where you had people that are doing everything that we tell people to do to be successful, right? They are taking risks. They're going to a new country. They're working their asses off. They're doing all these things that we tell people to do, and the system was still not working for them. And so it frustrated me, made me mad. And what occurred to me, though, was that this was an entirely solvable world problem, right? A lot of the things that people focus on are big and complex, and they require cross-collaboration between a bunch of different groups. He's nodding his head with the UN. He knows what we're talking about. And the reality is that this problem didn't, right? You had these workers who were taking this risk, working their tails off, wanting to go abroad to better their families' lives, right? They're trying to provide education for their kids. They're trying to do these things. And you have these employment agencies, you have these employers in Hong Kong and other countries who, for the most part, just want somebody good to come into their house, take care of their kids, and do a good job. But in the middle, you had these employment agencies, and their incentives were not to do a good job. Their incentives are actually, they charge the workers as much as they possibly can in these illegal fees, and they charge the employers as much as they possibly can. And they go to the employer and they say, hey, don't worry about it. It's buy one, get three free. We do free replacements because we care about you, right? But the reality is that those agencies are incentivized to create this churn. They don't want to get the right person into an employer's home. And so when we started to piece this together, we started to understand that employers were not happy with the status quo. And so I went back to university, and I wrote up this business plan for this idea of setting this ethical agency up that would set the standard for across Asia. So I sent it out to my co-founder, David Bishop, who's a professor at HKU as well. He got the plan, he sent it on to his network. It ended up with some guys at Goldman Sachs who said, hey, we'll fund you if you do this. I was like, oh, cool. Now, I've gone back and looked at the plan. It sucks. So the bar is lower than we think, guys. But what happened is I sent this out and they said, yeah, we're interested in funding this. And so I had other opportunities that I turned down, and I graduated and I moved out to Hong Kong, and I showed up and I went and met with the people at Goldman, and they're like, whoa, you're serious about this? I said, yes, I'm dead serious. I have a pregnant wife at home, which is true. Don't lie. You don't need to embellish your stories, okay? But this is what happened. Is that they said, whoa, you're dead serious. I said, yes. Turned down job offers. I'm fully committed to this. And so they gave us some money, and they just said, you go do everything that you can to run a successful business, right? You don't worry about fundraising, because it was about $75,000 US, and they said, you try to see how far you can go with this money. If it fails, then it fails, and that's fine. If it's working, we'll fund you again. So dedicate yourself to working on the company. And we have a theory of change that's a lot different than groups, right? There's some groups that, a lot of organizations that are socially motivated, they want to get to the person who has the saddest situation, who has the hardest story. I think groups like Lensational can tell those stories really well. But for us, we need the whole market to shift, right? We need these employers to demand a better service and to demand a service that they're not conflicted with the employment agent who's working with them. And so our theory of change is built around being the best service provider, right? If we came into the market and we said, hey, we're gonna be the nice people, and we'll take all the workers who've had really sad stories, and we're gonna put them into your homes, employers could be like, wait, this is the person taking care of my baby. I want the best person taking care of my baby, not the person who has the saddest story, right? So it would have failed. Instead, we said we're going to be the best at what we do, which means we're gonna vet out workers who we think are not gonna be successful migrants, and we're gonna vet out employers who we don't think can be successful employers. And so, and then the next step is we're going to become the biggest. Now I'm happy to report in Hong Kong over the last 4 years, we've become one of the 5 or 6 biggest agencies in Hong Kong for domestic workers. In the last 4 years, we have placed over 3,000 workers. We're placing more than 100 workers a month into these jobs with 0 fees. It's like more than 4 million US dollars, I think it's 5 actually, million US dollars in agency fees that we've removed from the system, right? And so, and our clients love us, and our workers love us. And it's not because we're warm and fuzzy, it's because we're awesome at the business, right? And so that became the focus. So the business starts to grow. Now, one of the important things that I think at people that are our age, and I say our age, like I'm not that much older, but I have 2 kids, so it seems like it. So when we're our age, the reality is if you're 25 years old, 24, that's like what I was, you're an idiot by most of the world's standards, right? No offense, you're all probably smarter than me, but you're still an idiot because you haven't gone through a full business cycle. You haven't seen what the consequences of certain small actions can be down the road. And so one of the things that we did really well at FAIR is we focused on building a lot of support from people who had more experience, right? And so my co-founder was David, and then a lady named Tammy, and David's kind of an innovator, social innovator type, teaches at HKU. Tammy, who was an accountant, super detail-oriented, and me, who's kind of the entrepreneur type. And then shortly after we launched, we had a lady named Jennifer Meehan who joined our team. And Jennifer was formerly the CEO of Grameen Foundation throughout Asia. And Grameen was Muhammad Yunus, won the Nobel Prize, all that. And so this is a lady who had tons of experience. And so what happened though is we were successful in bringing those people in, but then not just saying, hey, you're a mentor to us, and calling them once a month and giving them what we're doing and asking their advice. We brought in people who would come in and get engaged. Because the reality is that having somebody who every 3 months will check in with you, they're going to do one of 2 things. They're going to tell you exactly what you want to hear, or they're going to tell you that you're doing everything wrong every single time. Right? Because if they come in, and a lot of people feel that if they come in and tell you that you're doing everything right, they don't add any value. And so they're going to tell you to shift your strategy every 3 months. Right? And that's usually just terrible decision making. And so what we did is we built this team that could help a 25, 26-year-old person who had customer service skills and sales skills, there we go, have the decision making of a much more seasoned executive. And so what we did is we really worked through those early years. And so over the last 4 years, our agency has placed 3,000 workers, like I said. We now have 23 full-time staff in Hong Kong, and it is a break-even business on its own. As a standalone, it is actually making money now. And some of the coolest things that have happened has been that we've seen the market shift, right? So when we first started, the average cost of hiring a domestic worker with the big agencies in Hong Kong was around 5,000 Hong Kong dollars, okay? So when we started, we're like, okay, we know that that's not a sustainable number, right? It costs about 4,000 Hong Kong dollars to do the processing on the sending country side. For us, it's mostly the Philippines. So there's no way that these businesses can operate ethically at this $5,000 number. We need to bring that up over time. And so we launched, we had prices around 7,500 Hong Kong, 7,500 Hong Kong dollars. There you go. Thank you, you were helping me out there. And so we had a higher price than everybody. And then we did our official launch. And what she said about the press is totally true. But the one thing that I want to reiterate is that the press is worthless if you're not ready to execute. So do not try to go get press when you're in your fundraising phase or when you're in those initial setup phases. Go get press once you have 6 months of operating experience and you feel like you can start to put those pieces together quickly. We've been very methodical about that, because if we went and got tons of leads for clients that we were unable to place workers with, they wouldn't have a good customer experience for us, and it wouldn't matter anymore, right? We'd be this flash in the pan that had cool articles about us, right? And I'd be getting an MBA right now talking about how I had cool articles about my company. But that's really what happened. And so what we did is we focused on this execution piece, and that we really nailed it. And we created these great customer experiences. And what happened is right when we did our initial launch, these other employment agencies wrote a letter to the consulate of the Philippines and said we were breaking a bunch of the rules, right? And I was like, dang. And then I was kind of like, oh, that's awesome. Like, they're scared, right? They know a change is coming. And so we were able to easily prove that we weren't breaking any of the rules. And then we looked at their websites a few weeks later, and they had all copied our websites. They had our pricing, and they had our application forms that had been part of our process but never been part of theirs before, right? And these are all the big players in the industry. Now what happened, the company that actually signed that letter, they had changed their website. It was like a website, looks like it was done in like 99. But they dropped, in the middle of their website, they dropped a button that was the exact same color, size, and font of the apply button on our website, leading to a Google form that had the exact same questions that our website had. Word for word. A few spelling errors, but word for word on their part. But that is what they'd done. So they had all copied our model, right? And they were starting to do this. Now, a lot of people would be put off by that. But if we're setting out to change the market, if we're setting out to shift how people think about this, we were stoked. I was so excited and proud by that, because it meant that they knew that there was a change coming and they could see value in what we were doing. And these are allegedly the bad guys in our industry. For the most part, one of the things that makes us different, I don't think most of them are like these bad, evil people that are sitting in smoke-filled rooms. I think a lot of these business people that we want, that we don't agree with the ethics of their business, they're just bad business people who justify what they do, right? And so we've tried to reframe that within our organization as well. But what happened is they all changed their prices. So they went from charging 5,000 Hong Kong dollars to 7,500 Hong Kong dollars like 2 or 3 weeks later. And then what we've seen is they just raised their prices and just followed us. They basically pegged their prices in the market to ours, right? Now, I ended up sitting next to the guy who wrote that letter at an event about a year and a half ago. And so we're sitting at the event, and we'd been chatting, and my whole thing is that I don't think they're bad people. One of our culture code policies is we're gonna be nice to everybody. What we say is nobody changes because an asshole tells them to, which I believe is true. The key is you need to come in and have a positive interaction with somebody and explain to them what you're doing. And so we go through so we have this nice chat, and finally I pause and I kind of look at him and I say, so you weren't really excited when we got started, right? And you could see he'd been waiting for this all night. He kind of smirks and kind of tightens up a little bit. He goes, yeah. He said, but I gotta say, and I said, so what do you think now? He said, I gotta say, you've been the best thing that's happened to us. Because when we started, we thought you were gonna come in as the nonprofit, and you were gonna lower the market. You were gonna take the bottom pricing, right, and make it so there's no margin and you'll never be sustainable, and you'd make it so we could never adjust up and start to have better practices. But you guys came in as the nonprofit and had the highest prices and focused on the best service, and the nonprofit should never have the highest prices, so we've all matched you, right? So we've all followed you. Now what happened is really exciting. Now how does that actually impact the market, right? So employers are paying more. Workers are still paying for these jobs. It's the reality of it. But what happened is from the year 2015 to the year 2016, when they made that price jump, the number of workers who renewed their contracts with their employers in Hong Kong went up 24%. So the number had been stagnant at around 90,000 renewals, and it went up to 110,000. And what happens, why this happens, is those employers go to the website and they say, because they're trying to avoid this long service fees and things when they let a worker go, but they now go to the website and they say, maybe I don't want to fire this person if I'm going to have to pay this extra $2,500 or $3,000. Maybe I'll just keep this person because they're doing a good job. And so that churn rate reduced, which means they're going to be hit on their bottom line, which means those agencies say, okay, well, what are we going to do differently? And they start to think about how they're going to compete on a service level. But what happens is that removes $30 million US from the agency fees that would have typically been paid. That's exciting, right? We want to make it unprofitable to be bad, right? And so this is what's happened over the last few years. Now, as we took those steps, we looked around and we said, okay, well, what's the next thing that we need to do? And we thought, all right, well, how can we get as many people ready for Hong Kong as possible? And so we went and toured these training centers in the Philippines. And we're like, yeah, we're going to find the good training center, and then they're going to come through our system, and it's going to be awesome, and they're going to be well-trained. But we would walk into these training centers, and you walk in, and it's kind of like this big, like, empty room, like white walls and tile floor in a generic building in Manila. And we would walk in, and it was almost the same thing every time. We would walk in, and there's 15 people sitting in the corner of the room doing nothing. And we walk in, and they jump up, and they have these French feather dusters, like with the wood stick with the real feathers that you can never clean again, so they're super unhygienic. They would jump up, and they would go dust off the 1970s style wood panel TV set. And then we would start, and then say, hello, sir, hello, ma'am. And then we would turn around and walk out, and they would all go sit back in the corner. Right? So if you think about somebody who's coming from rural poverty in the Philippines to sitting in this training center told they're being prepared, to showing up and being expected to work at the speed at which a lot of our homes are working, you can see why they weren't prepared at all. And so but what happens is these agencies had benefited by their failure, right? They had benefited by getting those workers into jobs and getting them fired really quickly, because when they get fired, they then charge another worker to come into their place, and they create that churn. And so we said, well, we need to set the standard for the training. And so Jennifer from Grameen, she really dug into this. I can't take any credit for the training center. We went and got some money, and we set up a training center in the Philippines that's focused on preparing them not just for their job, it's preparing them for migration, right? Because if somebody can be awesome at mopping floors, but if they don't know how to communicate with their employer, then they're gonna get fired. And so what we did, and if they are always mismanaging their money, and if their family at home is creating chaos. And so what we did is we built a curriculum around what makes people fail in their migration, and then we directed it at people like that. And so the failure rate in the industry, anecdotally, is around 35%. And ours, at the agency and the training center level, have been 10%. So think about that convenience for employers. 1 in 3 employers is having to fire people, when they hire somebody, and ours, it's 1 in 10. And so it's made a huge difference on the results. Now, as we got things up and going with the training center, we kind of took a step back and tried to look at our strategy, right? And we looked at, okay, what are the next steps? Should we do a franchise model in where we try to replicate exactly what we're doing in the receiving country in Singapore, Taiwan, all these other countries? We looked at a lot of different things. And we realized that the real opportunity would be if we went down to the receiving country and really controlled the chain. Because then we would be able to control the entire chain from agency on that side, training on that side, to agency here. And one of the other things that I want to kind of talk about is it's not, people will say things, and especially in an industry like this, people will say, oh, well, it's hard because we can't control what our partner agency does, or we can't control what people in this other country do. That's so wrong. Don't buy that stuff at all, okay? You, as the consumer, as the client, control a lot more than you think. So don't be afraid to kind of use that power. So we've been working with a partner agency in the Philippines, and we went to them, and instead of trying to drive down their price, we just said, how much do you need to make on a per placement basis for this to be a good situation for you? And they said, this is the price. And we said, okay, well then we need to determine our price based on that so that we can make sure that you don't try to nickel and dime our workers eventually, right? And you don't feel that margin pressure. And so we've done that for the last several years, but what has come forward is that we think that this opportunity is actually much bigger than we thought it was initially. Well, we always knew it was big, but we've realized that there's opportunities in supply chains, there's opportunities in all these other countries. And big companies are very concerned with this. Nobody wants their company to be a slaveholder, And so what we've done is we've started to reach out to them. I moved to Manila in May to launch a sending country agency that would work with the big hotel and hospitality groups, that works with some of the big clothing brands, to get workers in the factories that are, the subcontracted factories that are ethically hired and working, not, being victims of modern slavery. And that we've seen huge uptake on that, and this is something these big companies really want to address. Now, the opportunities here, one of the things that I think a lot of times we get caught on is we talk about funding, like it's like this big limiting factor, or like, oh, that's the silver bullet, funding will solve stuff. The reality is that there is so much money in the world right now, and there is so much money going towards these SDG things, that you should not at all act like that's an excuse, and you should also not at all think that somebody who comes in and says that they can help you raise money is the difference maker, right? I was fortunate that I had my two co-founders that put a little bit of money up that was able to help me and my family come here and meet some of those basic, very, very basic needs, as well as my savings, but to meet some of those basic needs in the early few months. But I'm telling you, there is so much money out there once you start to see some progress. But what happens is a lot of times groups start to see some progress, and then they join the speaking circuit, and they start going out and talking about all their progress, when the reality is you need to be in your business doing the stuff that kind of sucks, because that's the stuff where you're going to learn, right? I had the opportunity this week to meet with some very, very high up people in the modern slavery space. And they said, you are the world expert in this, right? Now, I didn't become the expert by being like some brilliant person, right? Like I'm not, yeah. I had like a 2.1 GPA in high school, which is a C- average for anybody who doesn't know. It's not that. But what I did differently is that I realized that my value add would be that I could create a culture within a company and I could create a customer service experience that nobody else could. And so for the first 2 years of our business, I was sitting at the phone in our office in Wanchai, sitting there answering phone calls from employers who were upset so that I could understand it, so that I could help build a process to handle complaints. I could build a process to interview workers, to see what were the characteristics in workers that would fit well with employers and vice versa. And so what we did is that nitty-gritty is really what set us apart in a lot of ways, because it qualified us to then see the bigger picture. And the big picture is easy. It's the details in between of what it takes to actually be successful in executing a business that's quite hard. But if I would have, and I have to be honest, this one of my co-founders early on, within about, I moved to Hong Kong, I've been there like 2 months, and there was somebody from Forbes who wanted to write an article on us, on me. They're like, yeah, you're great, like you're this social entrepreneur. And my founder, David, was like, what have you done to deserve that? And I was like, oh, you're right, touche. And I was like, well, okay, yeah, I get it. And so we delayed that stuff that will pull you away from your mission until we had a team in place that could do it. And what's happened is when you do that, you also tend to attract more and more, even more talented people on to be involved with you. And so Jennifer, Tammy, David were the core founders. Since then we have on our board, it's a partner at Goldman Sachs, the global head of HR from Macquarie Bank, the former PwC Chief Operating Officer for China and Greater Asia, joined us. And these are the people that I'm talking to 2-3 times a week in order to get the advice that I need to work through some of these complex problems. And one of the things when you're looking at building that team up, one of my biggest pet peeves, and one of the things that I want you to consider, find people who you admire them as people, right? There's a lot of people who are successful in their careers, but they suck at life, right? You don't want to be emulating them. If they have horrible relationships with their family, if they're negative, if they're greedy, if they have all those things, why would you want them on your company? Why would you want to say that's who's going to be advising you and consulting you? Look for people that you respect them to their core, because those are the people that are going to really help you as an entrepreneur. They're going to help you grow as a person, as well as a business person. And that's been one of the things that we've found time and time again has been so helpful, because if it weren't for the team and the board that we've built, we wouldn't be at all where we are. And I've just felt really grateful for that. The other thing that I would encourage people to focus on, look for the things that not everybody else is doing, right? He's right, there's so much environmental stuff out there, and everybody's going environmental, but we got a lot of goals up here that we got to reach. And so we need people who will look at some of these other goals and say, okay, what's a solution for this? And everybody wants that scalable technology thing, right? I'm gonna do the technology that will do this, right? And it may be, and it could be a for-profit or nonprofit. The reality is that most of those technology, and they'll say, like he said, because I want to get rich, right? The reality is that most of these technology plays that people are talking about, they only work if there's one winner in the space, right? So think about how many fintech startups there are right now that are trying to do remittances of some sort. 10 years from now, there'll be 3 remittance companies, right? You'll decide between these 3 that you're going to decide. So instead of us shifting towards the trendy things that everybody wants to do that are scalable, we should be looking for the things that can have 50, 100 winners in the space, because your chances of success are going to go up a lot, and there may be 50 or 100 potential winners, but they're not going, those cases, those problems, those businesses are not going to attract the same level of talent. So your chances of growing really big in that space and becoming the expert are just so much greater. And so when you're looking at doing this, don't get caught up in what's sexy in the moment. Look at these cases and then see what your skill sets are, right? And for me, I paid for my university, so I came from a pretty normal, family in the US, and so I had to pay for my own university. And so what made me so confident in starting FAIR, like I looked at this and I was like, dude, I can solve this world problem, right? I can do that, was that I had the customer service experience. I worked at a call center for a company that did door-to-door sales of alarm systems, working in the retention department when people were mad and wanted to cancel, right? So one of the things is that I really didn't care what people thought of me, because I'd already had people hate me every single day for my entire job. And I was very comfortable with the customer service element, because I could say, listen, you have the right to be upset. I would be upset if that were you, if I were you. And so when you're dealing with a client who has a worker that they need to fire, who has these things, I don't get defensive. I just kind of think, oh yeah, that would kind of suck. I can totally see that. And when you create that culture within your team, you cannot hire in culture, right? You have to be the one that's setting it, and you have to be doing it by being there every day and working with your team. And I've just been so fortunate to do that. And as we've gotten, the other piece of it is just kind of getting lucky in some ways, right? The Goldman Sachs connection, that's luck. But what happens is it can start out as luck, and everybody here has a lucky break because you're studying at a university, and that puts you well ahead of most of the world. But the reality is that looking at those opportunities and then just maximizing them is so critical, and identifying them. And expressing appreciation for the people that are around you. Because the reality is that FAIR is a combination of lots and lots of amazing people that have come together. And if it were me, if it were about me, then I would be, like I said, getting an MBA, thinking I was awesome. Instead of working with an amazing group of people that really feel like we have a shot at solving slavery for millions of people throughout the world. And so I just want to leave those comments with you guys. Thank you so much for the chance to talk. I appreciate it, and if you have any thoughts or questions, I'd love to answer them afterwards. Thank you.